Welcome to Made in New Orleans. I'm Steve Martin. Thank you for joining us. Each week we highlight local artists and their work. Tonight we're joined by glass artist Carlos Zervigon and by gallery owner Erica Olinger. First, let's learn some more about Carlos Zervigon in this short feature.
Yeah, I was born and raised in New Orleans and grew up in sort of central uptown. These days people call it WLAE, or maybe the periphery of Broadmoor, and spent all my life here. My parents were from here, and so certainly that influences one's direction as an artist, I think, as far as where you're from, and from here in particular. And went to a public school at Eleanor McMain High School, and then on to Tulane. So at Tulane, I was at the time studying history and studying art with the intention of becoming a school teacher. In the art department, I saw listed as an option that you could study glass, art making with glass, and so immediately that struck me as a pretty exciting prospect. Some of the artists who are in New Orleans, who many of us think of, like Mitchell Godet or Mark Rosenbaum, actually spent time at the Tulane program. Then they went out into the city, had their own success, and then attracted other people to come work with them in the city of New Orleans. So as the Tulane program has endured, students graduate from Tulane, and many times they stay in New Orleans. We now have people who are from all over the country who make New Orleans their home, who are glass artists. And then we all work with one another, because you can't make anything by yourself of any size. You know, you need assistance, you need partners. So we depend on the presence of a substantial community to be able to make our work. The typical glass studio hot shop, we call it a hot shop, where the hot glass is being worked. It starts with a furnace. And so the furnace has to keep the glass molten at all times. It takes a long time to bring that furnace up to temperature, and it has to be brought up very slowly or the walls will crack. So it's a delicate piece of equipment. So we get the furnace up and then we load it with glass, and that glass stays hot. Then that's where you gather the hot glass. And to work the hot glass, you use what we call a glory hole. That's the round forge, if you will, that you move the glass in and out of in order to keep it hot. It has to be hot enough to manipulate, to move, to form, to sculpt. If it gets too cold and stops moving, it will crack. So you've got to keep it hot enough not to crack, and you have to keep it within reason, cool enough that it's not just molten and flying around and you lose whatever you sculpted, you know. When you watch a team of people working in the glass hot shop to make a piece of art, you'll see that it often takes a number of people. Everyone has to know what they're doing. Everyone has to know what comes next and how it will be done. And it usually involves a number of people actively engaged in that moment. The assistants who help me, we've been working together for a while, and we know each other's style. We know what kind of a job each person will do on the studio floor. So that way, when we get ready to do it, in a sense we've rehearsed. It's like a dance. It's a team of people. It's almost like on a football game. Each person needs to know what they're going to be doing. The whole thing falls apart. I'd say one thing I really enjoy about being an artist in New Orleans is that it's the kind of community where art is for everyone. And it exists on all levels, almost to the point that when someone begins to call themselves an artist on that sliding scale, am I just someone who likes to make these little things, or am I an artist? In New Orleans, it runs the gambit. People are doing wonderful things in their front yard versus high-end gallery finished art. So I would think that art making and art viewing and art collecting is for everyone, and that's when it's at its greatest strength. is when it's just a part of the community, when it's just a natural part of the culture, that there is art in your world. And you go to some places and everything is blah, there's no creative expression. Art is something else. And people say, I don't understand it. I would hope that everyone would love art and understand the broad concept, creative expression. That's really all you need.
And we're back with Carlos Zervigon. Carlos, thanks for coming in. It's good to have you back in here again. That was really exciting. And it was even more exciting for me because I was there all day. I really want to dig into talking about the process of making glass art and the whole scope of the equipment that you use, the techniques that you use, the safety that's involved, the flames, the fire, all the stuff that's better than Tonka toys for guys, you know. So let's tell me about the start. The blowpipes are in the oven.
Well, I guess the starting point for making glass is you've got to have the molten glass available to make a piece. And so for that, you've got that furnace that you saw in the video, and it's basically a gigantic box of fire-rated bricks, and it holds about 500 pounds of glass.
Where do you get your glass?
In this case, we order from companies that make glass specifically for the art trade.
Okay, so it's not just broken bottles?
No, it can be, but that's pretty hard stuff to work with. Okay. So you need a glass that stays hotter, molten, longer in order to work it. So we get the glass that then is ordered from them. We have to put it into the furnace, and it will melt for us and be available to us. And that's
pretty high temperature, because that was a lot of heat coming out of that thing.
Yeah, you got to keep it at about 2,100 degrees in order to work it.
Okay.
And it has to be kept at that temperature 24/7. Because
do you ever cook your lunch up on top while
you know, it's funny. It's so hot that you can't really cook your lunch because you'll incinerate the outside and the inside will stay cold. So it's been tried, but it doesn't work.
You had some pipes in the oven with I guess starter pieces on it.
Yeah, there's a situation where you work glass with steel tools, and the glass won't stick to the steel unless it is hot.
Right.
So if you take a cold blowpipe and put it into the glass, into the molten glass, it'll just slide right off of it. So you have to preheat the pipe. So we have all those pipes preheating that we know we're going to use that day, ready for action.
Right.
Then we can take them and we can go in and we put it into the glass, and then we turn it to gather up the glass. Like if you stuck a rod into honey and turned it, you'd get some gathering on the end. And then as it cools, then you can add to it.
Right. So I saw you going back in, and that just kept building the volume.
Right. So every time you go in, it adds another layer, and that layer is cooler than the glass that's in there. So when it hits it, it begins to slow down immediately, and you add to that exponentially. It gets bigger and bigger with each gather, and so that's what that's about. Then you have to make sure the pipe stays cool enough to actually grab it. You know, so you saw us cooling the pipe so it didn't burn our hands.
Right.
And then the other round furnace thing you saw we call a glory hole, and that's to constantly reheat the glass, because the glass will cool, of course, and if it cools too much, it will crack.
Right.
You know how if you've ever seen a glass get overheated suddenly, it will practically explode, but it'll crack. Yeah.
And I noticed that you were always conscious of in some areas, don't let the glass touch the glass after it was done. So evidently it chips and breaks.
It can chip, it can break. If you hit it with water, it can cause little fractures in it. And so you return to the glory hole constantly in order to bring it back up to a workable temperature.
Right.
So you want it to be hot enough to work, but not so hot it gets out of control, because you could just melt that thing right off the pipe. So especially when sculpting solid glass, this becomes a big issue of timing. So you're working with your assistants, and everyone has to know what's going to be done at what time.
Right.
They have to be familiar with the process.
Well, it's very choreographed, because you guys were constantly moving. I noticed that.
That's right. You have to know how to stay out of each other's way. It can be quite dangerous. There's large torches for reheating. I mean, if you directed that at a person, you could burn them very badly. So,
what really made that hit home for me was when you were dripping some of the glass off into a bucket of water, and as soon as that glass hit the water, it instantly started just turning to steam and boiling out.
Yeah,
and that's when, because it's all so pretty and everything, and you're looking at it and then you don't realize how hot it is.
Yeah,
you know?
There's a lot of energy stored in that glass, and so we call it stripping it. When I hold it up and let the glass run off, so we get rid of some of the excess, draw the glass forward. It's just part of the technique that can be used, and so it's 2,000 degree glass hitting water. So it immediately goes to a roiling boil, and it does tell you something about it. Now, just getting near it is a great deal of heat involved. So you'll see when I was using that hot torch, you see, and there's so many things. That hot torch I was using, you know, it's 3,000 to 5,000 degrees depending on the torch you use. You can't look at it without eye protection, and it melts the glass quickly for us to cut. Then when I go put that away, I better not be hitting somebody with it. So, in fact, everyone will be watching. Maybe they'll grab it for me when I reach it up, so I can keep on working.
I think you could start a new exercise craze. You know, just glass making exercise studio, and because it's so much movement, it's so hot. You have to like shed the pounds when you're in there.
There's an awful lot of skinny guys involved in making glass and sculpture. You've got to be in shape, and the larger you work, the more difficult it is. Think about the fulcrum of that weight at the end, and you see a lot of these glass sculptors who like to work big. They have big Popeye, the Sailor Man backs and arms. It's just necessary.
Well, in the physical environment of the space, we talked a little bit about making glass in the South versus making glass up north somewhere. There's things that happen because of the weather that or the climate that affect how you can work. So
it can make a little difference in how you treat the glass, especially in the end when we saw when we broke it off, we have to bring it to a certain temperature, and then we'll put a little bit of water to chill one spot, so when we hit the pipe, the vibration comes through and breaks it at that one point where we had caused some stress by cooling it. So if you're in a colder environment, there can be issues of how you treat that. But one of the main things is issues of ventilation, issues of your endurance. So in our environment, in any hot environment, especially humid, you've got to stay hydrated. You've got to pay attention to that. Way up north in Wisconsin in the winter, people will warm themselves against the furnace. And for us, we're just trying to find a way to shed that heat out of the building.
Well, I noticed that you had a lot of procedures that you used with molds and tools to shape the glass, and there was one point where you were rolling the glass and you had this big wooden, almost like a spoon.
We call it a block.
Okay.
To block the glass. Consider that the only way to shape the glass is to touch it with things other than your hands. So there are specialized tools for how you can cut, shape, poke, stretch, whatever the case may be. Those giant scissors, we call them jacks, to squeeze different parts of the glass. When you're rolling on the table, you're cooling it on the steel in certain areas, and you're flattening it, you're shaping it. Those blocks, the same thing. We're trying to get a particular shape in the case that we needed that day in order to blow it a certain way. But you can be very imaginative with graphite sticks, with anything to get what you're after.
Well, I noticed a couple of things. One, the whole time that you were working the glass, people were actually guarding you with the big wooden, charred wooden panels, you know, that were keeping the heat off of you. But I also saw you lay other little pieces of iridescent glass down and kind of roll it into the surface. Tell us about your concept of making that piece.
With that one, it's from a line of thinking I've been working on for a long time, sort of going back to some original thoughts, I guess, and exploring shapes in nature maybe that you can't see. So if you think about single-celled organisms and so forth,
and that show was that series is called what?
That, in a way, is going back to the biomorphics that I had been doing a long time ago that I still enjoy, and it is looking at maybe stuff that maybe looks like it's a reference to outer space or to microscopic life, as far as capturing something about the forms that you find there, that it can be very intriguing, very fascinating, and even though some of these things are very dangerous, they might still be very beautiful in terms of these microbes and so forth. And so it's going back to that kind of form and idea.
Well, I found it interesting that you were wrapping the glass with wire and then blowing inside and having it, kind of fill the space and have the wire define it. Is that something that you do a lot, where you sculpt the sculpt the glass with other things?
Yeah, definitely. And for a long time, I've enjoyed using the wire to force it to do other things. Copper you can use because it expands at the same rate of glass.
Right.
It won't break the glass when it's cooling. There are other things you can do. What's exciting is to go to a group of students and watch them. It's a group of advanced students who are still learning a great deal, and watch what they do. Mm-hmm. And they'll sometimes, because they haven't been told what it can and can't be done, they'll think of amazing things to do in terms of making a mold out of some scrap wood and blowing the glass into that, or again using graphite, which is nice and slippery on the glass, in a way to form it. You can't know everything about glass. Someone who says they know everything about glass sculpting, they're incorrect. You can't. Right. You end up specializing in what you need to make your art. But it's just the world's the limit. It's still being explored. And conversely, everything's been done, so right. You're not going to do anything for the first time, but you can find your expression in these techniques. Think outside the box and work with this ancient material to find new expression. It's an exciting field to be in. Use
the happy accidents as long as they don't injure you, right?
Yes, and that happens. That happens a lot.
What it mainly burns, or what type of injuries would you, not to scare anyone away?
I think that every student who's getting really vigorously engaged with it at some point will burn a finger. But basically, all the technique is about separating yourself from the heat, and you're using your tools. And so actually injuries in the glass studio are extremely rare. Might be more frequent in the
because everybody's so careful because it's such a
in the metal shop, in a metal studio, if something has just been cut and it's hot, you can't tell.
Right.
But in the glass studio, everything's hot. Everything's
constantly
hot. Don't touch
burning
anything.
myself because I reach out and grab that piece of metal I just sawed off or welded.
Exactly. So in the glass studio, you remember everything's hot.
Well, we had talked about the Mid-City Glass Studio, that's Yaya now, and how that works. But you have another project personally where your finished studio is, where you've taken Arthur Silverman's old studio and converted it into artist studios and other businesses. Tell us a little bit about that before we go.
Yeah, that building at 3915 Barone Street, it was always a sculpting studio. What used to be a bakery back at the turn of the century, then a sculpture studio for some 30, 40 years. And so then when I got it from Arthur Silverman, I cut it up into several units. So now we have 4 individual studios upstairs and 2 studios downstairs, and a nice community of artists. It's a nice energy, and I've been very happy with it. And that it could continue to be an art studio for however long it might last. That was I thought a very wonderful thing for the building.
Well, Carlos, thank you for all the stuff that you do for artists in the city. Thank you for your work, and thank you for being here. We're going to take a short break and be right back.